It's 4 o'clock on a Thursday, and you know what that means, don't you? It's time for another exciting episode of Texie's Quarantini Happy Hour. Woohoo! Hello, everybody. Hopefully you guys are seeing me now. I forgot to click a button. Can you see me? Can you see me now? Nobody's talking to me. Oh, you do see me. Okay. Anyway, I'm sorry about that. I forgot to click a button. I've had an intensely busy, like from noon to about 3:45 today. Like just 5 things hitting me all at once, and I actually forgot to click a particular button. Anyway, so today we're going to talk about microphone choices and placements. And please, if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. If you haven't given us a like, please do. Before we talk about microphone choices and placements, I want to talk about pork tenderloin sandwiches. We were talking about them the other day on the Quarantini Happy Hour, and Greg Carrozza mentioned that he was going to cook them for dinner the other night, and he did, and he sent me a photo. So once I saw his photo, then I went researching more about the famous tenderloin, which is made from pork, which is hammered out paper thin. I mean, literally, you got to get it down to like a 1/16 of an inch or thinner, to the point where it kind of, you can see light through it. It might tear if you hold it up. And then you take about 3 cups of flour, dump them into one of those little stainless steel mixing bowls, and take like a tablespoon of kosher salt, about a teaspoon of black or white pepper, dump it in there. Mix all that up, and then take 3 eggs and beat those, keep them in a separate bowl, and then take saltine crackers with the salt, not the unsalted ones. Those are boring, maybe healthier, but they're boring. Take those and put them in your blender and blend them until it's a fine powder. If you see any chunks or chips of crackers in there, you've done something wrong. So then first thing you do is you take the pork, the super thin pork, and dredge it in the flour. Then you dredge it in the egg. And then after the egg, you dredge it in the pulverized saltine crackers. And then you put it in oil that's about 375 degrees, preferably corn oil because it gets nice and hot without burning. And cook it till it's golden brown. My personal preference, which is the Illinois boy way, is you put it on a regular old hamburger bun with nothing more than cheap yellow mustard drizzled on it and a couple of ringlets of raw onion, and it's amazing. So anyway, Carrozza sent me a photo, and from looking at it, I'm guessing that he did the Indiana method because he's got a tomato on his. You would get run out of the state of Illinois if you put a tomato on your tenderloin, Greg. I was laughing when I saw it. All right, so here we go. Here is, hold on, what do I have? The Greg Carrozza tenderloin. Look at that baby, stacked high. Okay, so you'll notice that he's got it on a pretty regular bun. I mean, sesame seeds are okay. He's got tomato and onion on there and pickles on there, and there you go. But notice his is a little thicker, which I think is endemic to the state of Indiana. They tend to make them thicker there. I personally like them really thin because they're kind of like eating breaded pork jerky. All right. So now we're moving on because I did all this research today. This is how a tenderloin looks in the state of Illinois, and this is how it is eaten properly. Now, this guy, he's got it down. See that? He's got the mustard drizzled on there. He's got the basic hamburger bun. Look at the size of that baby. That is actually what the tenderloins look like where I grew up. Isn't that amazing? Oh no, French hamburger roll from Publix. No, it's just got to be a regular hamburger roll. Can't be anything fancy. I know it looks like Wiener Schnitzel, but it's not. It's different because of the saltine crackers. Okay, so now we're going to look at, here is another one that demonstrates the proper size of a tenderloin and what it should look like when it hits your plate at the dive restaurant that you eat it at. Look at that beauty. Oh, baby. Here's another one. But look, this person also had, I can't tell if there's tomato on there or not. They look like they might be following the Carosa method. And now we've got one, not very good lighting on this one, but looks pretty proper, except they put pickles on it. I don't know about the pickles, but notice they've got the mustard and the ringlet of raw onion. It's not exactly the proper kind of roll, but, you know, we won't deduct any points for that. Look at that. Look at that. The more irregular they are, the better they taste. But notice how everybody's drizzling the mustard. They've got it down. And last but not least, I want to show you actual buffalo chicken wings from Wings and Things in Pompano Beach, Florida. That, my friends, is a proper buffalo chicken wing. Notice that it's served with a little piece of carrot, a little bit of celery, and on the side over there, we've got some blue cheese dressing. Some people use ranch. I think that they're posers. And you won't find a better tasting buffalo chicken wing anywhere. So there you go. That's what today's show is all about. And now let's get back to the clown that actually runs this operation. There he is. Okay. Anyway, that was fun. Thank you for sending in your tenderloin, Greg. I appreciate that, and I'm glad you enjoyed it so much. Yeah, you have to have celery. Got to have the celery and got to have the blue cheese because it helps take the burn away from the wings. So, boy, I wish we could serve those at the road rally. I guess I could teach the hotel how to make them all. I've joked with my wife. Actually, my wife has joked with me. Sometimes she says, maybe you should retire and open up a restaurant that serves just tenderloins and wings. And I said, why would I want to do that? I already complain about working too much. Why would I want to start my day at like 8 o'clock in the morning doing all the food prep and be there until 10 o'clock at night cleaning up after the dinner hour and do that 7 days a week? I don't think so. Anyway, so let's talk about microphone choices. A food truck at the road rally, the hotel wouldn't allow it. That's where they make their money, is on the food and beverage. The bar, they definitely make money on that. Boy, I wish I got a 10% commission on the bar bill at the road rally. Now they won't let us. We've gotten in trouble. Do you know when we held the road rally at the hotel at Hollywood and Highland, I think it was a Lowe's at the time, I think. They called it a rock and roll hotel. They really, really, really didn't like musicians. We had to put down some ridiculous, like tens of thousands of dollars on deposit in case somebody trashed a room. We actually did have somebody trash one room, I think, that year. Excuse me. But they insisted that all food and beverage was supplied by the hotel. So when we unloaded our truck full of stuff for the staff to use during the road rally, we brought like 4 cases of bottled water from the grocery store to keep behind the registration desk for the staff to drink. And the hotel charged us for that because we didn't use their water. Can you believe that? they actually charged us like a corkage fee on bottled water that we brought from the grocery store. So, yeah, we did our 2-year contract at that hotel, and we were out of there and then on to the Westin. How about a weed truck? Yeah, that's okay. I think that is acceptable. I mean, there is a billboard just down the street from the hotel. If you look out some of the hotel windows, if you're looking west on Century Boulevard, there's a giant billboard for a company that delivers weed to wherever you are, if you can believe that. Anyway, this is a family-friendly show. In the state of California, though, it's okay because it's legal. Actually, it's legal in a bunch of states now. Yes, we do. We love the Westin, and they love us. It is a very nice relationship, I've got to say. I haven't seen the documentary Radium City yet, but isn't that about the West Clock factory where the ladies painted radium on the watch dials and they all got cancer or something? Anyway, okay. You guys ready to talk about microphones? Let's start with something that I don't believe really needs a microphone, but let's take the instruments one by one. And again, these are my opinions. Nothing is etched in stone. These are rules of thumb, and they are largely based on my knowledge of microphones from like the mid-'70s up until, I don't know, 1990 something. I haven't been in the studio since, I think, 96 or 97 was the last time I worked on a record. So anyway, there are newer microphones out there that may be better than what I'm recommending, but I believe that the mic placement tips will be good no matter which brand or which era of microphone you get. It's ironic, though, with all the newer microphones out there, people always still want the vintage gear, right? Okay, so let's start with the bass. I personally am not a fan of miking bass cabinets. I've done it many times, but I always end up not using the mic channel. I always ended up using a direct box. I really can't recommend a direct box. Direct boxes have gotten so much better now that you guys would probably know more about what's out there in the market. I think that it was Ken Calais that told me he used to use a thing called a fat box. And I think he had them custom built, or he knew the guy that built them, and I have seen them online for several $100s. And he said that was his secret to getting those great bass sounds on the Fleetwood Mac record. So there you go. If you can find the famous Ken Calais fat box, you're doing good. I want to say I had a blue one that I liked. There was a company, I think, called Sescom. They might still be around. And I think at my studio in Fort Lauderdale, we had like 8 of them. And one day I found one that just sounded better than all the rest for whatever reason. You know, microphones don't all sound the same, even though they're the same model. Guitars don't sound the same, even though they're the same model. So I did have one Sescom direct box that just sounded better. I don't know why, but there you go. So if you are going to mic a bass cabinet, and I should lay out a caveat for all this stuff I'm going to talk about today, which so many things go in. You know, there is no recommendation that's a one-size-fits-all, because different songs, different tempos, different people playing the instruments. Is it a piccolo snare? Is it a big fat, maple snare? Is it a plastic body shell on the drums, which actually sound really good? Or, what size tom-toms do you have? What kind of guitar do you have? Who's playing it? What octave is it in? Is it little chinks on the guitar? Is it open chord strums? Is the bass player playing something really fat and funky, or is he playing something that's kind of lilty and dreamy? All those things go into changing the sound, and it all starts with the player's fingertips and the sound of the instrument and the sound of the room. So, all that said, if I were going to mic a bass cabinet, honestly, I had the best luck typically with like a Neumann U87. I would pad it. I think the pads on 87s are 10 dB. Believe it or not, there are times on a bass cabinet that I would actually use the rolling off the low end on the mic. Because sometimes you just get all this stuff that's too low anyway. It's never going to make it to the record. So why get all that super low end energy coming into a microphone when really what you want is everything that's like above 100 hertz or above? So there were times I rolled it off. Another great bass mic is an RE20. RE20s are great utility mics. They look very kind of official and like something that Russians would have made in the 40s. But I think Electro Voice actually made them to drive nails, because those things, I have seen RE20s dropped on a concrete floor and nothing happened to them. I know that radio broadcasters have used them forever. It was frequently used back in my day as a bass amp mic. A lot of people had Ampeg bass amps with RE20s on them. That was kind of a popular disco rig, but again, they would always take a direct, and 9 out of 10 times they would use the direct. Do you get a little different sound out of a microphone in a cabinet? Absolutely. When you bring up that second fader and add the cabinet, the bass cabinet to the direct sound, does it take on a different characteristic? Yes, it does, but you really have to watch out for phase cancellation, because the two signals are often arriving at slightly different times. I mean, milliseconds different, but it causes phasing. It doesn't sound like that kind of phasing. You don't hear it whooshing, but it causes phase cancellation. And so depending, again, what octave the bass player is playing in, the tempo, how much right hand they're giving on the strings, is a slappy part or more legato part, all those things factor into it. But you can pretty much count on the fact that if you're using a bass cabinet mic'd and a direct, that you are going to be missing some frequency. So while you may tell the bass player when you're checking, trying to get your tone, let me hear like a G on the E string, and they're sitting there going boom, 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 and you think, wow, sounds really good, sounds really fat. But later, if they go up a couple of strings, and up a couple of octaves, those notes could literally be 20 dB lower because of phase cancellation. So just stick with the direct box. Forget the microphone. If you want to make the bass player, this is part of the psychology of being an engineer, put a microphone on the bass player's cabinet to make him or her happy. They will feel very important, because everybody else, the drummer gets like 8 or 10 microphones, the acoustic guitar player might get a couple of microphones. Bass players are flattered when you give them that much attention. Look, they've only got 4 strings, Sorry, John. Anyway, okay, so there's the bass, and obviously you want to throw a compressor on there. I have been messing around, as you guys well know, with Logic Pro, and I am finding so many things that the compressors that come standard with Logic, several of them sound really good on basses. If you want your bass to stick out a little bit more in a mix, throw, I don't know, Waves, CLA 73, which I think is the Chris Lord Alge, or Alge, I don't know how you pronounce the dude's name. I like him better known as CLA. Throw a Neve clone imitation thing on there, and hit it hard. Hit the drive button, or give it a lot of signal, and it will get distortion that, honestly, by itself, just listening to the bass, doesn't sound all that flattering. Put it in the context of a whole track, and you will be able to hear much better definition on the bass than you would without it. But again, depends on the octave, depends on the player, depends on the instrument, depends on the tempo, all that stuff. All right, Pearson's got a 5-string. He's highly intelligent. He can handle that 5th string. Hey, I bet you've got a fretless one too, Living Dangerously, right, JP? Anyway, okay, so there we go. That's bass. Now let's talk kick drum. I think the kick drum is so critically important, and I'm not talking about like all the 808 stuff, all the electronic stuff. That really hasn't been my world. I know how to get like a great rock and roll kick drum sound, a great pop kick drum sound, a great R&B kick drum sound. Anything that's kind of organic and in a studio that's got microphones in it, I'm really conceited. Is what I am. I'm not humble at all. I can get a damn fine kick drum sound, and I'll tell you what, there ain't that much to it. People think it's way harder than it really is. Again, it has so much to do with the foot of the drummer, the tempo of the song, how the drum is tuned. So assuming that all that stuff is kind of good enough, mid-level, you got a pretty hard right foot on the drummer. The skin is tuned appropriately. Take a feather or a down pillow, one of the heavier ones, throw it in take the front cover off the kick drum, throw the pillow in there, and push it up against the head, but not so tight. Just make sure it makes contact. Like a third of the pillow should be touching that rear head of the drum. Followed by a moving blanket to keep it from coming out, because every time the drummer kicks, it moves the pillow away. So take a moving blanket, fold it over until it's about the size of a suitcase, stick that in there, and then, here's the secret, is take the bass from a microphone stand or any kind of like 10-pound weight and throw that in there on the moving blanket. That keeps everything from moving around. And now you've got the drums sounding good. But here's the problem. If you say to the drummer, let me hear it while you're down there adjusting all that stuff, you will find that you will blow out your ears. So be careful doing that. You're really better off not trying to listen to the kick drum or a snare drum from 6 inches away with your ears. It just makes good sense, right? Anyway, so now you've got it happening. My favorite kick drum mic, and I know lots of people use all kinds of esoteric stuff. I have used 87s, by the way. But generally speaking, I'd want to throw them on something else that needed a large capsule condenser microphone. So I would go with the Sennheiser 421. And I would actually roll it off a little bit. And I'm looking for a prop. I need a prop. Okay. Let's say this is a very shallow kick drum. Really shallow. Looking for a microphone. See, I'm well prepared for today's topic. Okay, so I would take the microphone, but rather a lot of people will just stick the microphone like right in there. Stick it. Trying to think of the best way to show this to you. A little bit pulled back, like 8 or 10 inches back from the beater, on near the edge of the drum, but angled toward the beater, with the Sennheiser 421 rolled off. And I did that. I rarely used a compressor on it. I rarely used a gate on it. I got a lot of compliments on my drum sounds. Drummers always walked in and went, man, that kick is amazing. And I wasn't doing anything fancy. I would see other friends of mine that there's a lot of smoke and mirrors in engineering. When you're doing it at a high level in a big studio with big clients, you want them to feel like you're taking incredibly good care of them. So a lot of guys, even if they know that they can get a great kick drum sound in 5 or 10 minutes, will spend an hour or two working on it. First of all, they're probably billing by the hour, so yay, they get to make more money. And bands want to feel that they've got, like a Formula One driver sitting at the console getting their sounds formed. But anybody who tells you that they can't get a kick drum sound in 10 minutes is either a liar or they shouldn't be sitting in that room. Personal opinion. So anyway, that's my magic thing. I've used many other mics successfully on kick drums. oh gosh, I can't think of the brand. The Beyer kick drum mic that everybody uses, little square dude that's like this big. It's kind of like the size of a pack of cigarettes, maybe slightly smaller. I used one of those and it sounded great. It didn't sound the way I wanted it to. So I didn't end up using it, but it sounded great. It was a different kind of great than my normal thing, except I always got so many compliments on my kick drum sound that I really didn't want to deviate from what was working for me, you know? If somebody had walked in the room and said, I'm looking for a different kind of sound, I would have tried other stuff or gone with it on the record. But most of the time, probably 80-90% of the time on all the sessions I did, was a Sennheiser 421, pulled back a little bit and angled toward the beater. Of course, things affect it. Like, are they using a felt beater? Are they using a wood beater? Are they using a rubber beater? All those things make a difference. If you're looking for more attack, by the way, something that worked well for me was actually taking a little bit of gaffer's tape and putting it on the head between the beater and the actual head. I don't know why. In theory, you would think that that would dull the sound a little bit because you're adding a layer of something between the head and the beater. But I found that I really got a nice attack somewhere around, I don't know, 2.5K. Just an extra little snap to it. But again, it all depends on the song. I saw Pierre ask a question, what about a jazz kick? That would be... I'm trying to think. I did a record once with an artist named Ernest Ranglin, and I quickly realized I couldn't use... He actually said to me, you're a rock and roll engineer. You need to learn how to engineer jazz stuff. So I changed stuff up, and that might have been one of the times where I used less padding inside of the drum. I probably put the front skin back on the drum and might have gone with an 87 on that one, would be my guess. Because it's a different animal. Jazz drummers, by the way, do play with a much lighter foot. And they play more interesting figures. You know, with 4 on the floor, the drum has more time to speak. But if somebody's doing really intricate little parts and a lot of it is nuanced, you want a different microphone, probably a large capsule condenser so that it can pick up that nuance. So there you go. Yeah, Beyer. Was it the Beyer D20 or something like that, I think? Anyway, Ron Schultz, I'll do questions after I go through all the instruments, okay? So save that questions. All right, so now we've done the kick drum. Now let's talk about my favorite thing in the world, which is the snare drum. I know I've talked snare drums before on the show, but we're going through all the instruments today, for those of you who aren't regulars. So there's our snare drum. You know, there's a Shure microphone that hardly anybody knows, and it's called a 546, I believe, which is basically a 57, but on an angle. It's like a hammerhead. And it's really good because on a 57, which is what I normally use, because I didn't have a 546 for like the last half of my career. They had one at Criteria, but nowhere else that I worked. If you take a regular 57, I've got one upstairs. I should go grab it. And if this is the snare head, come at it like this. Some people will do it like that, and that works okay. But I've always found that you really don't need to mic the hi-hat if you can. You're going to be boosting the same frequencies on the snare drum and probably rolling off the same stuff on the snare drum that you would probably do on the hi-hat anyway. So if you're trying to avoid phase problems and you're conserving inputs, don't bother miking the hi-hat and just bring in a 57 about that far off the head, literally like an inch or two, maybe 3 if you're looking for a more open sound. On a little bit of an angle like that, it should work fine. If you can get it in there in a way that the microphone kind of looks across the snare at the hi-hat over there, even better, if it's the right kind of song and the right kind of hi-hat part. Dave Clark 5 had an amazingly cool snare drum sound. Wow, good to know. I like that band. Glad All Over, right? Yeah, that was them. Some people use an underneath, like a bottom mic on a snare. I've tried it. I've done it successfully, but found that this is a powder container, face powder. I just got a whiff of it. Now my nose is tickling or itching or whatever. So I found that using a mic under the snare, that's a good time to point it directly up at the snares from about 4 inches away. But the problem is now you've got a mic up here and a mic down there. What are you asking for? Phase problems. So if you're an experienced engineer, you know that that's going to happen, and you check it and move things around, check the mix between the two faders, and you will once again hear that you have some frequencies dropping out because of the phase issue. So that considered, I generally shied away from putting a snare mic or a mic on the bottom of the snare, but it was one of those psychological things I would do to make drummers feel better, like they're getting more attention. If they walked in the control room and said, the snare's close, but I'm not loving it, I'm not hearing enough snare, I knew that I could do that with a compressor with a slow attack on it, adding another 2 dB at like 4.3 to 5K maybe, somewhere in there, maybe as much as 6K. And that would solve the problem really nicely. But if I wanted to earn the trust of the drummer and make the drummer feel really good about him or herself, I would then go out there in the room myself. I wouldn't send my assistant to do it. I would go out there and I'd look at the bottom of the drum. I'd be very concerned about getting, and I was genuinely, you always want to get great sounds for your guys out in the room, but they love the fact that you get your butt out of the chair, walk out into the studio, and spend 5 minutes looking at the bottom of the snare, and then put a mic on the underneath side. A lot of times if I did do it, I would just stick another 57 under there. I can tell you that a large capsule condenser microphone like an 87 with a pad and a roll-off, because you're going to be very close to the kick drum, really close to it, put that down there and you will get a little more roundness and depth and a really nice top end on the snare. But again, the phase problems make it almost not worth the adventure. You can easily solve the problem by taking something like an LA3 or an 1176 compressor, give it, a moderately slow attack so that you've got a chance for the drum sound to happen before it gets compressed, and boost a little top end. It depends what kind of equalizer you're using, kind of which frequencies you use. And again, using something like a Neve 1073 and driving it really hard to 2-inch tape at +6 levels, 30 IPS, going to sound sweet. So there you go. That's the snare drum. Hi-hat. I almost always put a mic on it unless I was short of inputs. I would almost always record it to its own track just so I had it. But honestly, rarely needed it. And if I were going to mic a hi-hat, there's a microphone that seems like nobody really knows. I don't even know if they still make it anymore, but it was called a Shure SM81, if memory serves. It's about the size of that pencil, but fatter. Length of the pencil, width of the Sharpie. It wasn't a very expensive mic. I want to say that an SM81 was $250, $350. Excuse me. I didn't love it on a lot of things, but it did sound really good on a hi-hat. Problem was, because of its length, it was really easy for that mic, because by the time you add an XLR on the back of that thing, it was long enough that if you bring it in a way that is going to work from a positioning standpoint, it would get in the way of sticks. And it was not infrequent that drummers passing by it would whack it and just mess things up. So, remember the Sony ECM50 that I mentioned the other day that I'd love to put on the top end of a rock and roll grand piano? the Sony ECM50 or pretty much any sort of lavalier microphone. Yep, even a cheap, I've had a $25 cheap lavalier that I bought at Radio Shack, and it worked great. So just hang that about 3 or 4 inches above the hi-hat. Works really good on like a disco snare. You want that kind of open, closey, wispy kind of snare. Hi-hat. There's my hi-hat imitation for the day. I hope somebody sampled that. Yep, the 81 is good for high frequencies. That's why I put it on the hi-hat. See that? It came with instructions. I love the sound of those mics. I really do. I think they're highly underrated, and I learned that trick from somebody at Criteria back in the day. So there you go. That's honestly, I've used a 57 on a hi-hat. It sounded fine. It's all about knowing what to do with EQ. When you use a mic like a 57, that's a pretty unglamorous microphone, but you can roll off the mids. You don't need them. Anything like below 400 hertz, you don't need it. So roll as much of that crap off as you can, and you're done. Okay, do that sound one more time. There you go. I hope you sampled that, JP. Okay, let's do the tom-toms. I found that more often than not, and I'm talking just regular rock and roll tom-toms or pop tom-toms or disco tom-toms, not jazz tom-toms. Jazz is a whole different animal. But for the tom-toms, I would tune them with a 5-4-1. Doom, doom, doom. Okay? It works. There are times when you do 5-4-1 and maybe the high tom is tuned to the key of the song and it works beautifully. Depends where the bass player is playing. Is it, a lot of lower octave stuff? It's going to work great. If the bass player is playing mid-neck and your high tom is tuned to the key of the song, and that's 5-4-1 down, from high, mid to low or floor. Sometimes it can get lost with the bass. And there are times that you want, if a drummer's going to play a doom, doom, boom kind of thing, which I don't think people play a lot anymore, but that doom, doom, boom was pretty popular back in the mid-70s. You want to really hear those tom-toms. I love getting great tom-tom sounds where everybody in the control room is like, whoa, dude, that tom-tom sounds amazing. Stroke my own ego, I remember I worked with an artist from France named Gilbert Montagnier, and he was blind, and he had exceptional hearing. And he stood there for 5 minutes just extolling my tom-toms, the virtues of my tom-toms, just like, Michael, that tom-tom sounds amazing. I've worked with some of the best engineers in the world, and your tom-tom sounds better than everybody's. And he rattled off a list of all these great engineers in Europe, and my tom-toms were better. So, yeah, love my tom-toms. Okay, so tune them like that. I think I've told you the trick that I stole from the Fleetwood Mac boys when I was in Studio D at the Village Recorder when they were doing Tusk. And they were out of the studio one day. I was in LA working on another record or something and needed a control room for half an hour to edit some 1/4 inch. And so they said, just go into Studio D, don't touch the console, use the 1/4 inch machine, have a nice day. So, of course, I had to go in there and look at the setup for Fleetwood Mac. They were recording Tusk, I believe. And on the drums, they literally took... Good thing I've got all kinds of props today. They took sanitary napkins, folded them over about that big, and then laid either a $50 or a 1/4 on the back and taped it on there with a little piece of gaffer's tape, and then took a piece of gaffer's tape on the back side of it and used that as kind of a hinge. So they would tape that piece of gaffer's tape to the edge of the skin very near the rim of the drum so that every time the head was hit, it would lift up. Boom, physics, for every motion there's an equal motion or opposite motion, whatever that stuff is. So it would lift up, but the weight of the coin on the back would make it come back down. So you got this open, close, open, close. It was kind of an organic noise gate or ring gate, if you will, and it worked really well. Other people, and I've done this myself, would just take a paper towel or a sanitary napkin, about this big, generally speaking, and just lay a piece of gaffer's tape over it. It all depends on the snare. It all depends on the sticks. It all depends on the song. It depends on the tempo. It depends on how hard the drummer is hitting. But when you do this stuff enough, you've got this bag of tricks that you don't even have to think about. As soon as you hear a problem that you need to solve, you instantly know, oh, that will probably work. And 9 out of 10 times it would. And if that didn't work, you'd move on to your next little trick. So trying to think if there's anything else. I did this on snares, by the way, too. Sometimes on a snare, by the way, to dampen it, if I want it to be a little ringier and not like disco dead, just take several pieces of gaffer's tape, go out to the snare drum itself, release the snares, and take a stick and just lightly tap around all the lugs, which if you're working with a good drummer, they actually know how to tune the snare, and each one of the lugs should be tuned the same. Sometimes on tom-toms, we would detune one lug to make it go, doom, doom. There's another sample for you, JP. Really tuning everything equally, and you cross-tune the lugs. You never go one and then the next one and the next one clockwise around. What you do is you start with the one at 12 o'clock and then do the one at 6 o'clock, then do the one at 11 o'clock and the other one at 5 o'clock till you've gone all the way around the drum. And then if you want that kind of disco tom-tom that almost sounds like a sin drum and has that pew falling off sound, just detune one of the lugs. And the same thing with the snare is just release the snares and go around the drum and tap near the lugs about an inch inside the rim. And sometimes you will actually hear which lug, I don't know what causes it. If everything was tuned equally, perfectly, I don't know if it's the shell of the drum or some hardware or something, but it was not infrequent that I would notice by going around, ding, 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 and you would get to a certain lug, and it would either be much deader or much more resonant at that point in the drum. So if I wanted it to be less resonant, I would just take a piece of gaffer's tape and throw it on the head about an inch away from that lug, right on the skin, problem solved. So there you go. What size torque wrench? I don't know, but I remember a drummer named Sandy Fica, who is still to this day the drummer in the touring band of Firefall, what's left of that band. And I worked with him on several records at Triad Recording in Fort Lauderdale. And he was the first guy that I ever saw come into the studio with one of those adorable little drum tuning torque wrenches, and he would actually set it to a certain setting and then just go around the head without even listening and just go ding, 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 because the torque was the same on every lug nut, and then he would listen to it and fine tune it from there. I think it actually worked better than a standard drum key. Let's see. Okay, so those are the tom-toms. Now, I personally am a fan of removing the bottom skins from tom. It's 4:50 already? Holy crap. We may have to go 15 minutes long in this show. So take the bottom skins off, and my favorite mics by far on tom-toms are AKG 414s. Pat them, roll them off, throw them on there, and if that's your drum, mic them like that from like an inch or two away. You want the capsule fairly backed off. Like you don't want to put it over the middle of the drum because you'll be waving goodbye to a really nice microphone in short order. But I had very few of them ever get whacked with a drumstick when they were kind of out there. So there you go. An inch or two away from the drum. And on rare occasions, I would put those puppies like right near the skin, but it had to be for a certain type of sound, usually on disco stuff, which I tried not to engineer. And it worked really well. So I used that on the high tom and the mid tom. I have had engineer friends of mine tell me that new AKG, it's called a 212 or something, that's like, when I say pad them, microphones that have a switch, I'm looking around, I don't have a microphone with a switch on it near me right now, but microphones will have a switch. It says -10. All it does is knock down the input of the microphone going to the console. You know how consoles have a pad switch on them, where if you have a mic that's giving a lot of signal, like too much signal, and even if you open up the preamp just a little bit, it like overloads it. So you would pad that at the console. If you're working on something, particularly drums, anything that has just an incredible amount of dynamic velocity, you're better off padding it at the microphone, which just knocks down the signal from the capsule to the electronics of the microphone by 10 dB. I'm actually not sure if it knocks it down from the capsule to the electronics of the microphone or from the electronics of the microphone going to the console. But somewhere on the microphone side of that equation, everything is knocked down. Usually 10 dB is the magic number. I think every microphone that I ever used that had a pad. Most pro-level microphones will have a pad, by the way. 20 dB? I don't know. Back in my day, I remember a lot of them had 10. Yeah, maybe there are 20s out there now. Okay, so now we're moving on to the floor tom, and I think I've told you guys before, surprisingly, one of my least favorite microphones of all time happens to be Ken Caillet's go-to vocal mic on the Fleetwood Mac stuff, is the Sennheiser 441. It's the one that's about, 12, 14 inches long. It's square. I mean, it's not, the body of it is not round like that. It's actually squared off. Got a black body and a long silver grill on it. It's an end fire microphone, meaning that the sound gets picked up from the end, not from the side. The 441 on a floor tom, more often than not, sounded great. But again, it had a roll off. I would roll it off, because if you don't, you pick up a lot of whoomp coming at you from other places in the drum kit. And you don't need anything below 100 hertz on a floor tom. You just don't. So that was the deal. Take off the bottom skin, 441, kind of near the edge of the drum, pointed at where the stick hits, where the rubber meets the road, where the stick hits the drum. That's where you want the microphone pointed, because there's so much low end coming off a floor tom. You want to get as much of that natural attack as you can. So by having it out there, but angled toward the center of the drum, assuming that's where the drummer was hitting it, you get that nice attack. Overheads. There's a microphone I could never find later in my career that they had, I think 4 of them at Criteria. Bill Simzik used them on the Eagles a lot. They were called a PML. I looked before the show today. That's why I forgot to click that button. I was busy looking for that thing. I don't know what the model number was. I would just say to my assistant, grab me the PMLs. And I think they were dynamic microphones. And they were actually originally invented for the stage. And I think they might have been created to be a vocal microphone, but I'm looking for something I can draw on. If you can ever find one, check them out. I wouldn't buy it without listening to it. Looks a little inappropriate. Looks kind of like that. Oh, man. Anyway, actually, It was long, silver, and kind of a tapered thing going on up there. And I used them many, many, many times at Criteria. I didn't use them again later in my career. There are so many microphones that work well for overheads. Again, roll it off. You don't need all that whoopy sound coming off the rest of the kit. I would use 87s for overheads if I had enough in the room. I would use 414s for overheads. The PMLs work great. Sony C37ps, which are a pretty old school microphone that I happen to love. The first cousin of that was the Sony 377, I believe. Love that microphone a lot. As a matter of fact, Ken Calay's got a pair. And I told him if he decides that he's not going to use them, he bought out some other studio's mic closet. And when he opened up the footlocker, they were all temporarily stored in. I saw the 377s in there. I looked at him and said, Ken, if you end up not using those, can I please have them? I'll pay anything. They're great. I think they go for about $500, $600 a piece now used. And they're not incredibly consistent from one mic to the next. And if memory serves, they either take a AA battery or a 9-volt battery in the microphone, inside the body of the microphone. You have to actually unscrew the back, stick the battery in, screw it back together. They sounded great on overheads, but let's face it, you can use almost anything on overheads. And again, it really depends on, does the drummer have like 5 cymbals up there? Is he playing lots of crashes? That would be a different approach to miking than somebody who's just, riding a ride cymbal lightly and occasionally hits the crash. Different thing. Sometimes I would do this, get 2 mics about 4 feet over the kit, angle them out like that. Other times, depending on what was being played, I would drop the mics down 4 inches over the cymbals, making sure that when the cymbal gets hit, that the cymbal doesn't come up and hit the microphone on the other side. It depends. It just depends. Let's see, what should I do now? Electric guitars. My favorite miking situation on electric guitar in the world was having any sort of like 1960s Fender amp, a twin, a deluxe, a super reverb, any of those, with somebody who knew how to dial in a great sound. But, nothing like a Strat coming through a twin or a deluxe, and having bite, for lack of a better word, when they've got just enough preamp on it where it gets a nice bite, and then just stick a 57. If that's the grill, stick a 57 right there, right up, literally up against the fabric of the grill and pointing about, an inch or 2 away from the center of the cone. It's going to sound great every time. Throw a compressor on it, probably like an LA3. I mean, you could throw anything. I could throw a DBX 160 on an LA3, an 1176, an LA2A. All those things can sound good. It depends on the player, on the tone he's getting out of the guitar, on the part. Is he doing, chicken picking versus chinks? Is he doing bell tones? Whatever. But that combination for me, the 57 on almost any Fender amp, just sounded right. Would I also take an 87 and put it about 3 feet away? And if the amp were on a wood floor, which back then we didn't have a lot of wood floors, believe it or not, in studios, a lot of carpeting in the 70s, I would take an 87 and actually aim it at the bottom of the amplifier cabinet and the floor, so that what you're getting is more of the edge tone coming off the cones and bouncing off the floor, and you get some room and some, the actual sound waves have a few feet to develop, and they will sound different than sticking a mic right on the speaker. But the mic right on the speaker gives you kind of the balls of the amp. Having an 87 or something, a KM84 would do it really well. The Sony 377 did it well. Having it backed off from the cabinet a few feet would give you a resonance, a room tone without sounding roomy. It didn't sound like it was far away because it wasn't, but it gave you that open sound of the room without adding the distance, if you know what I mean. Let's see. All right, I was just catching up on the chat room there. All right, so now we've done electric guitar. Let's move on to acoustic guitar. I'm getting the feeling that I've done this before. Acoustic guitars, unless you're Andrei Stepanian playing a beautiful like finger pick thing or classical, I see very little reason to ever stereo mic an acoustic guitar. If you're doing a solo acoustic guitar, by all means, do it in stereo. But 95% of the time, you just want that acoustic guitar to sound like an acoustic guitar sounds to you out in the room. By the way, an interesting exercise is take an acoustic guitar, whichever one the guitar player is playing, and rather than embarrassing yourself by putting your chin on their shoulder to hear what it sounds like where they are, say, can I borrow your guitar for a minute? And just like strum an open E or an open G and just listen to it. Let it ring out and listen to which frequencies die away fastest. That's a really good way to know where the peaks are, the peaks in the EQ curve on an acoustic guitar. So sometimes, depending again on what kind of song they're playing, the tempo, how much pressure they're putting on the strings, is it a choppy part or is it a strummy part? Is it a finger pick part? Whatever. All of those things go into factoring what you're going to do. But the go-to microphone for me on an acoustic guitar was either a 47, a Neumann 47. If I had a 67 in the room, I might do it. But if I did have a 67, I'd probably use it on the vocalist. But any of the Neumanns that end in a 7 will sound really good on an acoustic guitar. I personally always had it like 4 inches away from the body of the guitar, aiming right where the neck meets the sound hole. And sometimes I would actually rotate it on axis a little bit because that gives you a decreased bass response, which gives you a natural roll-off so that you don't get the proximity effect and the wompiness that comes off the body of an acoustic guitar. So right there, just play that over for yourself like 3 times. Those are golden rules for acoustic guitars right there. What do we have left? Piano, I told you guys recently, you want to mic the strings that are being played most of the time. In a rock and roll or pop situation, there's no point in putting like an MS or an XY pair of microphones with the lid open 4 feet away. That's what you do for classical. That's what you would do for like new age piano. But when you're doing like rock and roll piano or pop piano where the player is playing pretty firmly to maybe really stridently, you want to mic the octave that piano is being played in. And frankly, I was a big fan always of kind of aiming the mic at where the hammers hit the strings. It just gives you more natural edge. Why should you? Of course, back in my day, we had to worry about adding a lot of top-end EQ because you got a lot of inherent noise from the console with that, which added to the noise of the tape and everything else. So now it's not as big of a deal. But if you had it, mic'd at the brightest part of the piano, you didn't have to boost anything on the EQ to make it sound brighter. So on the bottom end, and you still want brightness on the bottom end strings, and I would use a 414 or an 87 a lot of times for that. Sometimes for a really rock and roll piano part, I mean like we're talking Jerry Lee Lewis, a pair of Sennheiser 421s would work really well for that. Because let's face it, a Jerry Lee Lewis, part like that, you're not going to hear a lot of resonance or beauty from the piano. It becomes a percussion instrument at that point almost. I mean, it's percussive with notes. So you have to worry more about, will the mic crap out, which, if you didn't pad an 87 or a 414, you could crap it out with a heavy left hand on a piano. So I would do that on the bottom end, and my favorite thing in the world was to hang a lavalier mic, the trusty Sony ECM50 on the high notes. But again, unless you're doing something classical or jazz or new age, where you're going to open the lid and mic it from a few feet away and get the room and get the resonance of the piano, that's great. When the piano is the featured instrument, that is what you should do. But for rock and roll, man, get the mics close, shut the lid, throw a couple moving blankets over it so you don't get a lot of guitar amps bleeding in, and there you go. What else is left? Vocals. I saw a couple people are asking, I'll do vocals, then I'll do horns and brass. And mic under the piano? No, never. I've tried it a bunch of times. I tried it like in jazz and classical situations. Meh. Not that big a deal. It just didn't sound great. Okay, for vocals. There's no prescription in the world for vocals. Every vocalist sounds different, but I would say probably 70 or 80% of engineers would use a Neumann, either a TLM or an 87, a 47, or a 67 is kind of their starting microphone for somebody who they perceive to be an average. I don't mean average in talent, but average like, a middle octave, not a particularly thin voice, not a particularly fat voice, just your average vocal. Just stick up any large capsule condenser and it's going to sound pretty darn good. Stay away from foam pop filters. They definitely bite off a lot of the top end. Use the nylon stocking trick, over, those pre-made ones at the hoop with the nylon. Those things work great. They're psychologically, I find that those things impeded the psychology of a singer. So for some reason, those things were intimidating. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because there's a big lollipop sitting in front of the microphone, but it kind of bummed people out. So yeah, there you go. I've recorded vocals with a 57. There have been times where I gave a handheld 57 to a rock and roll vocalist who was just belting it like a metal guy or a hard rock guy. Let him sing into a 57 handheld. That's what they do on stage. Let him rock out with that. Nobody listening to a metal record is going to say, oh, that vocal sounds incredible. They're talking about the performance, not about which microphone you used. And you can fix everything with EQ and compression later. So just go for it. If you're recording Barbra Streisand, different animal, And again, that's the psychology of being an engineer, is catering to the whims and the needs of that vocalist who is the most important person on the record, certainly in their mind, and probably in everybody else's mind too, because if you don't have a great vocal, you don't have a great vocal. So go out there and try a bunch of different mics. I frequently would take two mics and put them end to end like this and right in front of the vocalist's face, so I could have like a 414 there and an 87 there, and then just A/B them just by muting and unmuting in the control room to see which one sounded better. Vocalists love that when you pay that attention to them and say, okay, let's run one down from the top just so I can get a sound, put it into record. Even if you don't have your compressor set right, even if you don't have it EQ'd right, don't worry about those details. Just hit record, because dollars to donuts, that vocalist is going to sing it better when they think that they're just testing out a mic than the minute you say, okay, let's go for one. All of a sudden, they tense up, their diaphragm gets a little more tense, their body language, everything about them changes when they know they're going for a performance. Very few vocalists can actually turn it on and do better when they're under pressure. I always recorded the scratch vocal. Always. Are you open to talk outside of music? Stuff about the 70s and stuff? in Illinois? I would, but not with this group of people. I think it would be unfair to them because it's, you know, you and I would relate to it, not these guys so much. All right, what else is left? Vocals. Okay, brass. I preferred to record brass in a semicircle around one microphone, frequently in Omni. Look for probably the livest part of the room, which nowadays is not a problem. Back in my day, rooms were largely carpeted, so you had to find, you know, a lot of studios would have like a parquet floor that maybe extended out 15 feet from where the glass of the control room was. And that's where you'd put the live stuff. And you got a little more live sound out of that. But the rest of the room was so dead, you didn't get a lot of reflections. But put the horns on there. Have the guys, this is important, have the guys take their shoes off because they're standing on wood. So if they're in their stocking feet, you don't get the shoe sound in between when they're blowing on their horns. Put them in a semicircle so they can see each other. Here's another trick. Put the mic, because most of the time horn players are actually reading charts. Oftentimes, not most of the time, but oftentimes. Put carpeting, like short indoor-outdoor carpeting on the mic stands so that you kill the reflections, and drop the mic stands down lower. You don't want the mic stand up like face high. Some people do that. I don't get it. Because all of a sudden you're blocking the sound going to the microphone. So put the mic stands down so like the top of it would be like chin high. All right? And the trumpets are going to blow over that. The sax is going to blow up. Trombones are going to blow over it. So you're pretty good to go. I would say 87 in Omni was probably my go-to thing. There were times that I used RCA 77s or 44s, which are ribbon mics. Depends on what you're doing. But, you know, ribbon mics have a warmth to them. They don't have a lot of top end, and put a trumpet up next to a ribbon mic and it's going to sound like you're shredding it, because you are. Apparently ribbon mics made today are much better able to handle that kind of level. Yes, take off your flamenco shoes. Absolutely. Yeah, I think the AKG 212 and the 414 are the same capsule. At least I've read that or been told that by somebody. Should we continue this on Tuesday? Just because we're already 13 minutes over. I know we started 5 or 6 minutes late. You want to continue it on Tuesday? Because I don't want to rush through it. But I know you guys like the studio stuff, and I can do this stuff with my hands tied behind my back. So, yeah, let's wrap it up on Tuesday. And why don't we... Oh, by the way, if you're new, hit the record button. Give us a like. Drop comments. Please drop comments for future show ideas. Pat War, I can talk recording all day long. Yeah, so can I. You know what else I can talk about all day long? Let's see. What else can I talk about all day long? I can talk about pork tenderloins all day long. See you guys on Monday for the Top 10 show. We're going to play the top 10 things on the Taxi website. That'll be a great show. And then Tuesday we'll pick up talking about mics, and I will take your questions. Until then, have a great weekend. I bid you a fond farewell.